All right, well, I'm gonna get started here because we have a limited amount of time to cover a lot of information. So if you're just joining us in the room, there are handouts up at the front of the room in the corner. Feel free to grab them now if you want. If you want to wait, that's fine. Everything is also online. If you're joining us online, then these handouts are all linked at vsac.org/ccp. So if you don't want anything now, you don't want any paper, if you're physically here too, feel free to go online and everything is in there so you can download it, look at it there. My name is Beagle Bourgault. I work at VSAC. I'm the director of our talent search program, which is one of our outreach programs, working in schools and around the state to help students make plans after high school. And today, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about financial aid and managing college costs. So I'm guessing that everybody who's participating here is doing so because they have at least a small concern about how to pay for education after high school. So you may have heard that it's very expensive. So if you're looking at college or really, lots of training programs, whether they're a one-year certificate, a bachelor's degree or beyond, it costs a lot of money. And there are ways to help you pay for it. So what we're going to do today is go over a little bit about the costs of college. What does that even mean? We're going to look at some ways that you can get assistance to pay for that and some ways that you can actually apply to get that help. So before we even get into that, the details of the dollars, one thing to think about is how are you planning to do this? So if you're at the last session in this room, we talked about the process of thinking about where to apply and how to go about that process. One of the factors in that, of course, is cost. But in order to do it the best way possible, what we recommend is that you think about these things up here. So what the student expects, what you might expect as a parent, guardian, family member, and then really just what the reality is, you want those all to meet in the middle so that you're all on the same page. What you don't want to do is end up where, you have a student and they're like, yeah, mom and dad are paying for this. I don't even have to think about it. And parents are thinking like, I fully expect you're going to work full time and pay for a part of this at least. And you have a mismatch. So it can be really helpful to communicate about the costs up front. It can be difficult to have those conversations. So we recommend starting early and, just trying to have honest conversations about the reality of what you can afford, who's going to pay for what, who's going to do what in terms of applications and keep track of things, all of those things. So communication, being on the same page can be very helpful. So when we say college is expensive, what does that mean? So here are some numbers for you. These are general. These are not necessarily specific to everyone. The most expensive college in the country right now is approaching $80,000 per year. And that's right now. That is going to increase. Every year, costs for most schools goes up. Now, not for every school. Sometimes they freeze the price. It's very rare that they will reduce the price. But right now, the most expensive institution is very, very expensive. You multiply that out by 4 years, you're talking over $300,000. That's a lot. At the University of Vermont right now, you can see that the cost is about 36 and change. And you could do the math here. When we look at Community College of Vermont, typically they are offering no more than 2-year degrees or less. So for 2 years, you can, that's what this math is doing here. And then Vermont Trade School, there are other schools which are not what you would consider a traditional college that may have steep costs. Well, they may have lower costs too. But if you just look at these numbers, you can say, all right, college is really expensive. If you go to a school's website and you look up how much does it cost to go here, you can get some numbers. Now, when we talk about the cost, these numbers here include everything. So there's tuition. That's what does it cost to go to classes. Then there are things like room and board. Student is living on campus. Student is getting meals on campus. That's going to be included in this price here for this example. And there are other costs in there as well. So there's sometimes fees for various majors. Schools are going to take into account that you have costs for transportation. You have other things you have to purchase. They really hope you're going to maybe buy some clean socks and shampoo. So there's some supplies built in there for your days when you're at school. So that's what these numbers are. But what you really need to look at is what we call the net price. So this net price is really just this simple equation. This cost of attendance, that's the numbers you just saw, the raw sticker price minus any aid that you receive. So we're going to get into financial aid and what that means. The gift aid, when we talk about that, that comes in the forms of grants and scholarships. We're going to define those in a minute. That's basically free money you're getting. You do not have to pay back. So you're going to take that cost, subtract any of that aid that you get that you don't have to pay back. That's your ultimate net price. That price varies quite a bit. It varies based on your family income, your family assets. It varies based on, do students get scholarships? Do they get other support from the institution they're applying to? We'll go into a little more detail on that. But the key thing to know is the net price is really what you're worried about. Well, maybe you're not worried, but it's the thing to be thinking about. That's what you need to pay. When we take that into account, we can do some new math here. So these same institutions we're looking at, what this shows on here is the net price for all students attending in their first year. So that most expensive school, if you look at the net price, the average price that students are paying is significantly less. Now, I can't remember exactly which school this is based on, but this is often true. Schools that cost a lot will give out more money. Now, this is an average. So it means some people, yes, are going to pay the full price, and some people are going to pay close to nothing, just depending on what the school has to offer, what the student's eligible for. But you can see that the net price is always lower than that sticker price. Again, maybe your family is one that pays the full price. Most people have at least some kind of assistance to reduce the cost. So that's what these numbers represent. All right, so how do you find out this net price? You can go to a school's website and look it up. Just do a search for net price calculator, and you can find that. Every college is required to have a net price calculator. What that allows you to do is plug in your information and get an estimate of what you might have to pay. So it's going to ask you things like, you know, what was your family income last year? Did the student have any earnings? What kind of grades does the student get? It might ask about GPA. It might ask about college test scores like the SAT or the ACT. So it's a series of questions. Some are very simple, some are more complex. But what it comes out with is, based on this student at our institution, here's an estimate of costs. It's not a guarantee, but it can give you an idea what that is. Now, you can do that for every single school, or you can go here to College Scorecard and get a sense of that without having to plug everything into the calculator. What this offers you as part of what they do, there's tons of data about schools in here. You can get like admission rates and continuation rates and those kinds of things. Very, very helpful just exploring schools in general for our purposes. They have information about what are the costs, what is the net price on average, and then they break it down by income band. So your family makes, say, between $0 and $30,000. Here's the net price for those families at this school. It's between $30,000 and $75,000 a year. Here's the net price for those families at this school. So if you have a sense of like, well, here's what our family brings in, you can look at that and say like, it's going to be around here. Now, the reason this is important is that because school is so expensive, you really, really want to look at like, well, what might we actually pay at this institution? So my guess is like, you've probably heard of, there's this school, it's Harvard. You heard of this one? So everybody's heard of Harvard. Yes, they have been around for like 300 years or whatever. They have built up a huge pile of money. It's a big endowment. They are very generous in giving out aid, but you have to get in. Other schools don't have as much money. So it's a way for you to compare what is the actual cost going to be. All right. Key thing to know here. The way the cost of college works is colleges are going to assume the student pays and the family pays. Now, what this means is the student, of course, it's always the student involved there, but also parents, sometimes guardians, but that is who pays for college. It doesn't matter if a student's 18 or 20 or 22, they're going to look at that and say the family is paying for school. So while all of this is centered around the student, when they look at who's paying, They are going to look at the family. So family income, family assets, what do parents make, what do the students make, and so on. They're going to look at this. Now, the family is defined in different ways. If you have a student who lives with both parents, pretty straightforward, that's a family. If you have a student who lives with only one parent, that's going to be the family in this case. Student lives with a parent and a step parent. That's the family for purposes of financial aid. Now, that's the starting point. Some schools will say, oh, you have a parent and a step parent, we're going to use that. But, you know, we actually also want information from that other parent who you don't live with. Not every school does that, but some do. So when we talk about the family, just the general idea is it's students and parents who are paying for school. That is what colleges and other institutions are going to be looking at. All right, so let's just talk about what is some of the money out there that can help students and families pay for school. So the first one is grants. Now, grants are great because they're free. If you're eligible for a grant, you don't have to pay this back. It's a gift, and you get this. So you have to apply for it, and you have to be eligible. For the most part, grants are based on financial need, but not always. These can come from the federal government. These can come from the state of Vermont has a grant program. They can come from the school itself that a student's applying to. But in general, it's free. You don't have to pay it back. And it's often, most of the time, based on your family's financial circumstances. Next one is scholarships. So I'm guessing many of you have heard of scholarships. This is free money. You don't have to pay back. So it's very similar. All right. The difference here, however, is scholarships are competitive. With, say, the grant in the state of Vermont. You apply for that, you're eligible, you have financial need. As long as there's money, you're going to get it. Like, at some point, money will run out, but if there's still funding and you're eligible, you will get that grant. With scholarships, you're competing against other students. So there might be 100 people apply, only one person can get one. You might be really qualified for that scholarship, but someone else, they're a little bit more qualified. So they're competitive. That's the thing to keep in mind. And we'll dive into details a little bit more about this. Work study is another type of aid. So this is generally a job students have on campus. If it's federally funded work study, students have to meet certain income criteria to be able to be awarded this. Other students might get a job that's funded by the on campus, funded by the school itself. But work is one way. And then finally, everyone's favorite, loans. So just to define that, loan is money you have to pay back. Now, there are specific student loans. There are federal loans, private loans, other types of loans, but there are loans that are designed for students who will be going to school. Often that means payments are not required while a student is in school. Sometimes it means there's no interest while students are in school. So there are different types of loans, but they're often designed for students or for families, for parents, who are where that student is attending school full-time or even part-time. All right, so those are kind of the general types of aid a student and family can get, but how do you get it? So again, we'll go into more detail, but just to give you the names of these, you will come across these again. But let me just take a moment here to say, like, I'm going to throw a ton of information at you right now. If you do not remember all of this, don't worry about it. First of all, you can look it up. There are also other workshops that we offer around the state in the fall, usually, sometimes in the spring, to help you get more information. But there is a lot to know here. This system is complex. It's complicated. There's a lot to know. It's okay. You can do this thing. You just have to go through the steps. A lot of this is online. It's written down. So there are ways for you to look it up, get familiar with the process again, especially if you have time, if you have or you are a student who's a sophomore or a junior, you're going to be doing this stuff during, for the most part, senior year. So just be aware, it's going to be okay. So just to know, the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. You may have heard of this before. You may have completed this before. Every student should fill out a FAFSA if they want to get any money for school. If you do not fill out a FAFSA, you are essentially saying to this institution you're applying to, I'm good. I don't want any money. You want to fill out the FAFSA because even if you think, I'm not going to qualify for anything that's based on financial need, we're not qualified for that at all. If you want to get loans, often the best loans to get are federal loans. You have to fill out the FAFSA to get them. So you want to fill out the FAFSA as a starting point. Sometimes it's required even for some scholarships that you fill out the FAFSA. So you want to do that. Every student has to do one. Every student has to do it every single year they plan to go to school. So that's the form. The next one is the Vermont grant application. So I mentioned that there is a grant in the state of Vermont. So this grant is available to anyone who's a Vermont resident, as long as you've been resident here long enough. And you can apply for it. It's based on financial need, as I said. So the starting point for the Vermont grant is actually the FAFSA. So information gets pulled from the FAFSA to determine eligibility for the grant. So it makes the grant application very small, but it's another one you want to do. You have to do it every year. It's pretty straightforward. There are other forms that some schools are going to require. So it's important to do your homework to find out. So students applying to 5 schools, look at all 5 of them. Find out their financial aid website page. Find out what do they need in terms of applications. Some require nothing. They're like, fill out the FAFSA, that's all we need. Others will say, we have our own very special form. You fill this out and it's like this magical thing. It collects other information other than what is on the FAFSA. We put up here the CSS profile because this is a form that some schools require. Now, the thing about the profile is that it can be used by many schools. So there are lots of schools that say, instead of doing our own form to collect information, we'll just use the profile. So sometimes students will have 2 or 3 schools that require additional information. They fill out the profile one time and it goes to all of those schools. So it's nice because you don't have to fill it out multiple times. Like you don't have to do a separate form for every school if a school uses the profile. One thing to be aware of, there is a cost for many families to fill out the profile. Be aware of that. However, usually if they're asking you to fill it out, it's because the school has money to give out. So you want to fill it out. Families who qualify based on their income don't have to pay that fee for the profile. But if you do, be aware, it's not like a scam thing. You know, it's an exception to financial aid where they might ask you to pay a fee to fill that out. And then there are 2 other things. So scholarship applications is something to fill out. Now, the thing to be aware of scholarships, aside from the fact that they are competitive, is that it's not like there's one application you can fill out for every scholarship you might want to apply for. Sometimes you don't have to apply at all. You apply for admission to a school and they have scholarship money specifically for students at that institution. And they'll say, oh, great, you've been accepted. Here is the president's scholarship. And they just give it to you based on your academics or something in your admissions application. But they also might have a separate application that you have to fill out just for their school. There might be another application. Coca-Cola has a scholarship. It's this big, huge scholarship. It's available nationally. Anybody can apply for that. If you're eligible, great. You're gonna have a lot of competition. It's a separate application. So there may be multiple applications to fill out for students who are looking to get scholarships. And then finally, if you're looking to get a loan, there may be separate applications to see if you qualify and for how much and so on. So those are the forms to fill out. All right, so we're gonna go a little bit into how do you actually do this with a little bit of detail. So the FAFSA, as I said, is important to fill out. You want to fill out the FAFSA. In order to do that, you have to create an account. So the way to do that is to create this FSA ID. FSA is Federal Student Aid. ID is identification. Lots of acronyms you might be getting in the world of financial aid. So the FSA ID, every student needs to create one of these, and at least one parent needs to create one of these. There may be cases where both parents have to create an FSA ID. But the key thing to know is that it takes a little time to fill out. So you just want to make sure you give yourself time to do this. You don't want to wait till the last minute and like, I'm going to fill out my FAFSA, and you do your FSA ID right then. Starting next year, they're not even going to allow you to do that. You have to do it a little bit ahead of time so it can get processed. The reason this exists is it is verifying you are you, because the FAFSA asks for personal information. It's going to ask for your contact information and social security number and your income and all this stuff. It's very detailed information about you. So there's a lot of security on there, which means it just takes a little bit more time. Highly recommend you do this, at least a week before you're actually going to fill out the FAFSA. But if you're eager to get started now, you could do that right now. You could get an FSA ID. I recommend you have a way to save your username and password. If you are a parent, you have another child who is already in school, or you are a student yourself and you have an FSA ID, you don't have to get another one. You can use the one that you already have. Once you have it, you have it. So like I said, you fill out the FAFSA every year. You just use the same credentials every time, but you do have to do it ahead of time. There is two-factor authentication required for this. So anytime you go to log in, you want to fill out the FAFSA or get other information on your FSA site, you have to, there's two-factor authentication. This could be by email or text. Now, what we found sometimes is that families might be going to fill this out and they put in a phone number and then there's no cell service where they are while they're filling it out. So be aware, anytime you use these, it's gonna send you an email, it's gonna send you a text to verify it. So you just have to be prepared for that. Like I said, you have to set this up for each individual. That means it's gonna require a separate email for each person. And we recommend students don't use their school email address. You leave school, you graduate from high school, and that email goes away. So create a Gmail account or find some other email that you have to use for this and other financial aid and admissions applications. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blast through all this information. At the end, if you have questions, great. If you are online, Carrie Harlow is helping us out to answer questions, and she's extremely knowledgeable. So hopefully you can get your questions answered there. All right. So when can you do this? First of all, like I said, the FAFSA is required. It is available typically October 1st, 2023. Just so you know, there are some changes that are happening to the FAFSA. It's possible this will get delayed, but as of now, we expect it to be available for October 1st, 2023. So if you are a junior now, you will be a senior next year. This is when you would fill it out, starting then anyway. You want to make sure you do the correct version, because if you go into the FAFSA on October 1st, there will be a version for next year, and there will be a version for the current year. Some students may be applying for the spring or even for the current year. So there's two versions in there. You're applying for the year the student will be attending. Now, sometimes people ask like, oh, my student's a sophomore. Can we just do this now and get it over with? You can't. You have to wait until the year before you plan to go, or during the year if you're, say, going to go only in the spring. All right. When do you fill this out? So it's available October 1st, but every school has their own idea of when you want to get this in. If you're applying early action or early decision or early whatever, you want to make sure that you fill this out by that early deadline if there is one. Because if you apply early, often what happens is school says, fill out your financial aid forms, get those in, and your admissions application. When we accept you, hopefully, you will find out about an offer of financial aid. So you just want to make sure you meet that early deadline if they have one. Other schools may not have a deadline till March 1st, February 1st. It's up to them when they need it. So one thing to do is check with every school, when do you need to have this done, and just meet the earliest one. You only have to do it one time. You list colleges on the FAFSA. Right now you can do 10. They're changing that. You're going to be able to list up to 20. Doesn't mean you should apply to 20 schools, because that potentially is very overwhelming, but you can add a lot of schools on there. The way it works is you fill out the FAFSA, you list all these schools, it gets disseminated to the institutions. They have that information, and the college or that school is going to tell you what you're eligible for in terms of aid. You don't hear back from FAFSA or federal student aid what you're eligible for. You hear that from the institution you're applying to. So it's important that you list a school on there so that they can get that information, and then they'll tell you about, hey, here's what you're eligible for. You can change your mind though. If there's a school you decide, I'm not going to apply there, you can take it off. If there's a school you hadn't thought about early on, you can add them in, and they're going to get the information. Once you resubmit it, they're just going to get it within a few days. So it's okay to make that change. There are other things you can change on the FAFSA. It's not like a tax return where you submit it and then you realize, oh no, I have an extra zero in my income. Like, you can make some changes in there if you have them or you realize you made a mistake. So that's important to know. All right, so like I said, there's some changes to the FAFSA that are happening. Now, the reason we point this out is If you have seen the FAFSA before, you've done the FAFSA before, it will look different starting next year. If you've never seen it, awesome. This is just your reality. This is what's going to be on here. But it does have fewer questions. Like I said, the FSA ID, you have to do it ahead of time. Right now, you could go in and create that FSA ID, do the FAFSA the same day. They're not going to let you do that anymore, so you got to plan ahead. And we put these, again, some more acronyms up here just so that you've heard it. EFC is expected family contribution. Right now, you fill out the FAFSA, it spits out this number. Here's your expected family contribution. But it's not really what you're expected to come up with. It's really just the number that financial aid's based off of. So they're changing that name to the Student Aid Index. So it is a number that determines what you're eligible for federal aid. So you don't need to know this. You just know when you fill out the FAFSA, it's going to give you a number at the end, and that's used to determine your eligibility. They call it the Student Aid Index, or SAI is what they're going to call it. So you will see that in the future. We know that changes are going to be happening. We know some changes are going to be in there, but we're not sure when or exactly what they're going to look like. So we're going to keep updating our website and so on. Any presentations we do, that kind of thing. We'll try to get information out there to make it easier, but just know some changes are happening. All right, so what is this determined? This SAI, as I mentioned, it's based on several factors. So it's kind of like you get this number and it says, if this number is this amount or lower, you're eligible for a federal grant. If it's this number or higher, you're not eligible. If it's within this range, you're eligible for this certain type of loan. So it's important to have that. And what the FAFSA uses to determine this eligibility for your federal aid, it's based on income. So again, parent and student. It's also based on your family size. So this is basically who's living with you at this point. So you have lots of siblings. Okay, that's going to be a factor. You have 2 parents versus 1, that's a factor. The federal poverty level and family size and so on, your income, that is a factor that gets put in there. Assets, so what this means essentially is money you have in the bank, do you have any stocks or bonds, do you have any real estate? It doesn't include retirement accounts and your home, which is the assets that a lot of people have, but anything else is included in there. And then finally, the age of the older parent. So just be aware when you're looking at financial aid, one of the things that's going to be part of this factoring what you're eligible for, like if you're a parent and you're really close to retirement age or beyond potentially, that's a factor. So there's this expectation that, oh, you have to save more for your retirement because you're so close. You won't have as much income once you retire, that kind of thing. So the older you are, the more of an allowance there is. All right, so let's talk about the Vermont grant application. So another form you can fill out starting October 1st. This will be available, at least that's what we expect this year. It's open to all Vermont residents. Again, make sure you do the one for the year the student will be in. So if you are a junior now, next year will be a senior. You want to do the 24-25 school year. So if you want to get state aid, you have to fill out the form. So one thing to be aware of is that some schools in Vermont especially will say to a student, you're eligible for this amount of aid, and they will include an estimate of the state grant on there. So they'll say, it looks like based on your FAFSA information, you're going to be eligible for a state grant. They make an estimate. Now, you're not going to get that unless you actually apply. So it may seem obvious. If you want it, you have to fill out the application, but that's the case. You have to fill out the application. It's pretty simple. There is no deadline for the Vermont state grant. So funds are just given out as students are eligible. Once they run out, they run out. Now, they don't typically run out immediately, but if you apply early, then you can correct or add information that is needed to determine your eligibility. So you want to be able to do that. For example, what may happen? You fill out the Vermont grant and you're living with only one parent. So VSAC, who administers this grant, will say, no, we could use some information about your other parent. Please fill out this worksheet. And so, you just want to make sure you get that information and can fill it out. Give yourself time to do that. Anything that we ask for additional information, you can do it all online. So it's very handy. One other thing to know about is this My VSAC account. If a student is applying for the state grant, Or there are scholarships you can apply through VSAC. You need a My VSAC account. Key thing to know, this is a student account. So sometimes parents will go in, they'll fill it out, and it's like, do the grant application. It's like, if you do that, you're applying for yourself. You don't want to do that. It's the student's account, student's aid, even though parent information is required. So one thing to think about is all these financial aid forms, they are student applications, parent information may be required, but student application is key. Okay, so the question is this for Vermont residents applying to Vermont schools? Actually, no, you have to be a Vermont resident. You can take this grant out of state. So if you're eligible for a grant in the state of Vermont, we're one of the few states that allows you to do this. And the philosophy behind this, 50 something years ago when this was created, was students are the ones who are going to make the choice about what's best for them. Not all programs are offered in the state and so on. So you can take this out of state, but you have to be a Vermont resident in order to be able to be eligible to get the Vermont grant. All right, we're moving along here. Okay, so some ways where you might be able to maximize your financial aid are listed on this slide. One is just academics. The better your academics, the more likely you're to get a scholarship from a school you're applying to. So, you have perfect grades, A's in every class. I mean, they're going to say, we really want you here because you're a great student. We're going to give you this scholarship. So you're just more likely. It doesn't mean you have to get all A's. It's all relative. Now, you may apply to some school that's in Utah and they have very few Vermont students and they're like, we want to entice you to come. As long as you meet some minimum threshold of academics, then we'll give you a merit scholarship. But the better you do, the more likely you are to get these kinds of scholarships. You're also going to be more competitive when it comes to any other type of scholarship from outside organizations. So academically, the better you do, the better chance you have. Again, you can only do so much if you're a junior. Well, you got 2 years behind you and nothing you can do about. So don't stress about it, but just keep that in mind. Another thing to do is just to challenge yourself in terms of thinking about where you're applying. If you are going to be in that top percentage of students, maybe you're a B student and you say, I'm not at the top of my class, but I'm a pretty good student. You might apply to a school where they say, again, oh, you really are the kind of student we want to have. We're going to potentially give you some money. So challenge yourself in terms of thinking about where you apply, whether it's geographically or programmatically or whatever. The school and community involvement can be helpful, both because it can give you a leg up in terms of admissions, gives you more options in terms of where you go, which gives you more options in terms of how you pay for it. It also can be a factor in scholarships. So the more you do, like, are you just an interesting person who does interesting things? There might be a scholarship that says, oh, you have a job in a grocery store. That's great. We have a scholarship for students who work in a grocery store. So it could be any number of factors, but just think about what is it that you're doing. The more that you do, the more likely there's going to be something out there for you in terms of scholarships. The special circumstances, the reason we put this up here is that you might fill out these financial aid forms. You fill out the FAFSA and ask for income and your assets. You have income from these other sources and so on, but it's not going to ask you about that, family member who's in the hospital and you had a lot of expenses because of that. That is a special circumstance. If you have something like that, a big expense, a change to your income, you lost your job, you changed jobs on purpose or whatever, there's a change to your income for some reason or expenses you have for some reason outside of the questions on the forms, tell the schools you're applying to and tell VSAC. That can be helpful because there is some flexibility for those schools to say, oh, we'll make accommodations for that. We will take that into account. They're not going to do it for every circumstance, but they might. So a classic one is, you're filling out the FAFSA in 2023, the fall. It is going to be asking for 2022 tax information. Now that's a long time that's gone by from December of 2022 till October 1st or later. So your income may have changed during that time. That's what you want to tell all of the schools you're applying to. Our income change is lower than it was. Can you take that into account? So any special circumstance, communicate about it. Scholarships are, again, I mentioned that They're out there, they're competitive. You want to find them and apply for them if you want to get that extra money. I will tell you about scholarships. They are a pain. It's hard to find them. It's a pain to apply. You might have a bunch of applications. You might have to write an essay and another essay. You have to get a letter of recommendation. It totally depends on the scholarship. Lots and lots of students simply don't apply. You're not going to get that money if you don't apply. Look for them, typically junior year, apply for them in order to be eligible. It's a really easy thing to blow it off. This is kind of a pain. I've already done all this admissions work, but the more you apply for, then the more likely you are to actually get them. How are we doing here? All right. So again, some other ways to think about, there's obviously like, you can fill out the forms, you can do all of this, but some other factors to consider are things like looking outside of Vermont. You could look in Canada, depending on when you're applying and the value of the dollar. Sometimes it's a really good bargain to go to schools in Canada. The cost is often lower. If the exchange rate's great, then that can really save you a bunch of money. Sometimes schools, you might think like, oh, but I'm going to get in-state tuition if I stay in Vermont, so I'm not going to look outside of Vermont. Sometimes schools outside of Vermont are actually less expensive, or if they're willing to give you some money to attend, then that out-of-state school is going to be less. It just depends. You have to do your research and figure that out. Dual enrollment in early college. My guess is there's at least someone who is a student here who's done dual enrollment or early college, but just a refresher, every student who is a junior or senior in Vermont, attending a Vermont high school, can get 2 dual enrollment vouchers. That's 2 college classes they can take for free. Early college is when you take your whole senior year and you're doing college classes. Now, the benefit of that, obviously, is you can get some experience with college classes, potentially you're more successful, but it can save you money. So if you take even just 1 class, and that's 1 class you don't have to take because you get the credit for that already, it could save you some money. You do a whole year of early college, maybe it's 1 whole year you don't have to pay for. So those are 2 options. They're not for everybody, but they are available to Vermont students. So AP or advanced placement classes, many schools will see that you've taken advanced placement classes and you take the test and you get a certain score on that test, and they'll say, great, you don't have to take introductory French because you took the French AP test and you got a 4 on it. That's great. We'll take that. No requirement that you take that foreign language. So they can sometimes mean there are fewer classes you have to take if you do well enough. But the other thing with advanced placement is, again, like the previous slide where, you know, try to do well academically, schools see that you've taken advanced placement classes. Again, it gives you a little bit of a leg up in terms of admissions, which gives you more options, which means potentially more money. So that's AP. This NEBI one up here, I'm guessing many of you have no idea what that is, but it's another acronym. This is New England Board of Higher Education. There is a program through NEBI where if you are going to a certain institution in New England that does not offer a major in Vermont, they will give you a discount on tuition. So as an example, marine biology is not offered in Vermont. Like, we're not an oceanside state, but you can go to the University of Rhode Island. They will give you a break on tuition if that's what you plan to study. So you can go to this website, the NEBI website, and you can see what programs at what institutions will give you a tuition break. There's often like surprising ones in there, and it shifts around depending on what schools offer and don't offer in any given year. But it's just something to think about. If you consider going out of state, staying in New England, there might be a discount for you at certain schools. So it's another thing to think about. Transferring is another thing to think about. So you potentially, like if you do early college, for example, that's one way to do it. But maybe you go to Community College of Vermont, you start there, you do 2 years there, and then you transfer to UVM or another school. That can save you money because, as the numbers we saw up there, first thing, CCV is a lot less expensive than most other schools in the state of Vermont, or really in a lot of places. So it can be a really inexpensive way to get started. You transfer somewhere else, whether it's for 1 year or whether it's for another couple of years to get a bachelor's degree. You know, you still get your degree from that final institution, but you potentially have saved some money before then. So that's one thing to think about. And then, well, obviously living local. So I'm guessing some of you didn't have to travel very far here. So hypothetically, you could live nearby, live at home, and go to UVM. Maybe you live down near Norwich University, and you could, go there and commute from home. So it's one thing to consider. I've certainly worked with students who are like, I'm going to live at home and save some money, and they just do that for a year. They save money 1 year, and then they decide they want to live on campus, or vice versa. And then finally, service is something to think about. There's AmeriCorps, there's the National Guard. There are programs out there where you put in some service time and they'll give you some money to help pay for school. So it's another thing to think about. All right, we don't have a ton of time here, but just to blast through some of this, there are basically 3 buckets you're looking at when you're looking at paying for school. You've got income from the past, you've got income right now, and you've got the future income. Future income is basically borrowing. There are loans for students and parents. One thing to mention here, though, is payment plans. So a payment plan, what that does is, say the school costs a certain amount of money, you get some aid, that's great. You have a balance you have to pay. Maybe you can't pay that all right away. So what the school will say is, well, why don't you pay that over the 10 months of the school year? Start in July, and then you go through the end of the school year. You just make regular payments every month. So you don't necessarily have to pay the whole bill up front. You can set up a payment plan. There's sometimes a fee for that, but it's a lot less usually than borrowing that money. So it's one way to go for if that can work for you. Sometimes schools will set up a payment plan even just for part of it. So you borrow some, you use the payment plan for others. You can kind of mix and match. All right, so when we're looking at savings, one thing to think about is obviously the more you save now, then the less you have to pay, less you have to borrow. Think about, for students, are you going to work over the summer? Is there anything you can save as you're thinking about going to school? It's easy to just spend it all, but can you think about, is there a way to save in the short term? So again, borrowing money is possible. You can borrow like the full cost that's not covered by any other aid. That can be a lot of money for a lot of families. So, you want to borrow as little as possible. It's kind of the goal. So, all right, I have a question. So the question is, can you take an advanced placement test if you haven't taken the advanced placement class? I think at some schools, they will allow you to do that. So you'd have to check with the school, with your high school. Yeah. Sarah, how's our time? It sounds like we have like 1 minute or something, right? Okay. So I'll skip over some of this. There are limits to federal loans. So I mentioned that federal loans are the best types of loans. Usually they have the lowest interest rates. Sometimes students can qualify to not have to pay interest while they're in school. They usually have the best terms. They're sometimes forgivable. If you're going to borrow, often these loans in a student's name are the place to start because they just simply have the most benefits and cost the least. There are limits to these. Cumulative limit, if you borrow the whole amount, would be $27,000. There are some students who can borrow more, but we're not going to get into that right now. Just in terms of what's available, this slide and the next slide are very similar, but know essentially that there are federal loans. You kind of want to look at that. The institution itself might have a loan that they can give you. Often they give you really good terms on that loan if it's available for you. And then there are outside organizations like VSAC that can lend money to students and families to help pay for school. Usually what you can borrow is that total cost, take away any other aid, whatever's in the middle, that's the maximum you can borrow or less. So you may say, oh, we only need a little bit, we'll borrow a little. You may need the whole amount and you can borrow that. So really, this is the same thing for students and parents. Interest rates vary a little bit. This July 1st date's important to keep in mind. So yeah, there's some interest rates that we put up there, but it's going to change July 1st every year. There's new interest rates for all of these loans. So you just have to look at what it is at the time that you might be applying. So some places to get some information about costs. Mapping Your Future is a good one because you can get some salary information about different careers. There are calculators where you can look at, if I were to borrow $10,000 and I have to pay it back over 10 years and there's a 3% interest rate, what would my payment be? I would recommend as a student, take advantage of those calculators. It can be really instructive to see, oh, there's this big fat number to borrow for school. Like, what does that even mean? But if you can break it down and say every month you're going to have to make this payment once you graduate from school, it can be really helpful to get a sense of like, what does that even mean? All right, I'm just going to skip over this for a moment because we're almost out of time here. Just know in senior year, again, you can create accounts, My VSAC, FSA ID. You don't have to do it now, but you can. Junior year, do some research applying for scholarships. Most of the time, you're going to do that in senior year. You're going to be actually applying. The one final thing to mention, since we're about out of time, is this unified scholarship application. So VSAC has an application for scholarships that where you could apply for many scholarships at one time. There is a booklet, this guy. Next year, it's going to be a different color. It's also online, but this lists a whole bunch of scholarships. There's a whole bunch of them in here. Some you do one application. There's some others that are just listed in there with other applications, but it's a great way to get a whole bunch of scholarships in front of you at one time, and often to do just one application. That's going to be due in the winter or spring. This year it was due the 15th of February. So it's going to be about the same time last year before the school break. All right, just make sure there's nothing else I need to mention. You can get resources here. Yeah, so like I said, online, this booklet about loans is available over here. It's also available online if you're not in the room. And then if you need help, again, this slideshow is going to be available online, so you don't have to necessarily write all this down. But there are ways to get assistance. The FAFSA folks are great with the chat. VSAC has a line you can call if you have questions. And like I said, there'll be other presentations in person and online around the state next year. Okay, so I think we're out of time. Am I correct? So we're out of time. If you need to leave because you want to go to your next workshop and you're really here, that's fine. If you have questions, I could take one or two, and then we're gonna have to move on. Sarah's got the mic if you have a quick question. All right, so the question is around what parent information goes on the FAFSA. So typically, if a student lives with both parents, both of their parents, then both parents' information will go on the FAFSA. If they live with just one of their parents, then that only one parent's information needs to go on the FAFSA. But if there's a step parent involved, then that's considered the family, the parent and the step parent. So a student lives with those two, then that's just information that goes on the FAFSA. Not everyone's happy about that, but that's the formula. It's based on that. The reason I mentioned the other parent is that some schools will say, well, we also want that information. The FAFSA will not ask for it, but the college may ask for information, financial information about a non-custodial or other parent that the student does not live with. All right, thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. If you have another question, I'll be here for a few minutes. Feel free to come on up, and hopefully I can help you.
Scholarships that you build up there.